problem is we constantly fail to deliver that. People don't necessarily understand our language. So as architects, we have to find the language to communicate.
What practical steps, though, can architectural practices sort of apply to their own thinking?
Men are involved in the design of a home, and actually women spend an awful lot of time at home. How often are their voices heard? Hi, I'm Ana McMillin. I'm a director of architecture at Broadway Malyan, and I also have a couple of other functions. I'm on the steering committee of the National Women in Architecture, and I'm an elected executive member of the Urban Design Group.
Anna, thank you so much for joining us at this UKREiiF special. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Oliver. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me here.
So your work spans everything from master planning to mentoring, with a focus on inclusivity. But take us back. Was there one moment that sparked your passion for the built environment?
Oh, one moment. It's probably three, I think, or more than one. I mean, I think the first is actually probably comes from my dad, who did a lot of studies on social housing for, I'm Portuguese, for African returns from the former colonies and into neighborhoods and how they established neighborhoods in and around Lisbon. So yeah, I used it to go with my dad as I was young, and he was kind of explaining some of his studies, although he's not an architect, he was a sociologist. Other than that, traveling as a child, going to see beautiful cities like Paris, Barcelona, even Lisbon, it really shapes how I see and think about places for people, cities that work for people, that have a mix of uses, have enough kind of vibrancy and have an economy that you can kind of feel in the way people and businesses operate. Then in terms of my practice, probably more recently, I think a key project for me has been the regeneration of the Aylesbury Estate, which I had the great pleasure to lead for the outline planning submission. And we spent a lot of time engaging with the people there, with the locals in the estate, touring around the places, understanding simple things like how is it to walk into your flat, what's your communal entrance looks like, what's your green space at the verge of your edge of the privacy home looks like, and talking to people, and then comparing those spaces with other parts of London, with Islington, with other parts of Southwark, and understanding how important it is to shape a certain type of place, how that affects communities, and why we really need to be really serious about doing great places for people that can last for a bit longer than just 30 years. I think the Aylesbury Estate, failed in many aspects, and through that analysis and then through the kind of propositions of doing what is a city scale size, is a big chunk of land, I really understood. I really got drawn into understanding how we can do that better and what we have to do.
For those who might not know, I do know, but the Aylesbury Estate, can you tell me a bit more about what that was and what that is becoming?
Yeah, so the Aylesbury Estate is, in essence, is a big estate, basically big slab blocks facing onto Burgess Park. The flats themselves are not too bad. They have, they were in Parker Morris standard, so they're fairly large units, but the urban design is pretty horrendous. You've got very many inactive edges, lots of green space that is really hard to maintain, has no overlooking. The communal entrances are very hidden. There's a lot of problems with sort of the ways the deck access was designed. There's problems with the construction as well and the quality of the buildings themselves. But in essence, it is an environment where you feel there's not a proper street with front doors on the street. There's not identifiable sort of local squares, local parks. Though there are trees, but they're kind of almost randomly staggered and through the area and don't really form.
And what period's the original construction from?
It's a modernist. It's from the 1940s, 1930s. Yeah. There's different phases. There's a bit of variation, as not all buildings were built at the same time, but it's around that period.
It's a really interesting project.
Post-war.
We've been talking a lot about place making, or even possibly place shaping, some people have been saying. I think it was interesting to hear in your introduction that you're on the National Urban Design Group Committee, and I think trying to understand what place making is, is really important, and I just wondered about what your definition was of that and how it related to that project. Would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to provide my definition. To be honest, what makes a good place is actually it's actually not a complete secret. It's been in guidance for a long time. The problem is we constantly fail to deliver that. These principles have been in the Urban Design Compendium since 20 years ago. What makes a good place is to design streets with active frontages, with front doors, to design in a scale that is suitable for human beings, to combine different sort of shapes and variety of buildings in a coherent sort of composition that creates a proper townscape, creates an articulation between sort of continuity and variety, meaning you build within character in the area. It doesn't mean that you kind of necessarily repeat and be going into a pastiche. That's not what I mean. But I mean you develop and you build a design within the character of the local area, integrate landscape spaces, integrate trees, simple things like streets with trees and being able to see a little bit of glance of green from your kitchen is really fundamental.
I couldn't agree more. And what I'm interested in is that there's a sort of, you have mentioned that we don't always achieve that as a industry. There's a lot of legislation out there to try and encourage it. What's going wrong? Why is that not being achieved?
Because there's more than what I was just mentioning. I think some fundamentals to get a good place is to get the places to develop in the right places, to have the right connections, to provide a mix of uses so you can create not just homes and not just estates, but actually communities, actually places that drive economic development, and that's fundamental. That's what we're sometimes not doing quite right. I mean, the process by which we go about to select sites where development falls, the kind of so-called call for sites, is basically leading us with development wherever you manage to make a case for it, rather than where it's right to do it. So we end up with places that are disconnected, that don't have enough transport support, and then lead on to excess dependency on cars,
so you're
not other uses.
In some ways, it's less sort of maybe the architectural profession designing things. We've got good standards and good ways of developing defensible spaces and links with landscape, and this is more about some of the challenges around infrastructure and kind of higher level planning, local plan, other kind of strategic master planning.
Correct.
Which is where we're kind of getting some stuff wrong.
Yeah, correct. I think 100% correct.
I think if you take the Aylesbury, it's an interesting one. The estate that was there, so do you know Nicholas Boys Smith?
Yeah.
He always tells this anecdote about how he was taking his son to B&Q in somewhere down the Walworth Road, and he drove past an estate which he doesn't name, and he noticed that it had been knocked down and it was being rebuilt, and he says, in exactly, as far as I could see, the same way that it had been when it was a failed estate. And so, if you look at those, Aylesbury was 8 stories, something like that, concrete blocks.
Slab blocks.
What is the difference? How is he wrong? I think he was talking about the Aylesbury estate. He's never said it, but I think it would make sense that it was. I live around that area, and it's that is on the way to B&Q.
I live not far too. I live around the area.
And so now, what you're putting back, you've got some taller elements, I think probably up to maybe 20 stories.
Yeah, you go up to 18, 20
on the park edge. The local plan reallocates it to be redeveloped as residential. Okay, yes, you're introducing some commercial functions that wouldn't have existed there before, but other than that, planning policy is just saying you're going from residential blocks to residential blocks. I'm not saying they're the same thing, but could you tell me the difference? What is the difference, and why do you think it's planning, not architecture, that really makes that place work?
Okay, so I would say it's planning and urban design, not just architecture.
Yep.
And I think the fundamental difference between the Aylesbury estate as it is today and the Aylesbury in the regenerated version, it's actually to do with the urban design. So presently, where you have 4 streets, we will have about 12 streets. So it has to do with the scale of the blocks, the scale of the streets. It's not just the height of the building is replacing 8 stories with 20. It's the actual form of the block. So instead of slab blocks with no clear fronts and backs, there are perimeter blocks courtyard blocks with many communal entrances, so each block or each entrance leading onto about 8 flats per core, rather than leading on to, I can't remember the exact name, is about 30 or 30 something. I could be dropping the incorrect number. So it's essentially about the urban form. And that's completely
and the spaces
different.
in between the buildings, the spaces in between the
grain.
buildings, so you're getting a connected network.
Yeah, it's completely different. You're getting a connected network. You're mixing pedestrian, cycle movement with vehicular movement, whereas the present form is quite modernist. So there's the kind of bridges over, and there's all this concept about detaching pedestrian movement from all the other ones, and that in an urban context generates quite a lot of segregation.
I couldn't agree more. My only thing that I completely agree, and I'm kind of very much part of that. I guess from my experience, one of the challenge has been when you get organic cities growing, they often have a better kind of network of connection sometimes where they're less planned than ones that are more planned. And sometimes it kind of fails when it's kind of overthought in some of the, I'm not saying in this particular example, but in many of the kind of Houseman, there's all sorts of examples. I was just wondering whether there was any thoughts, on how we can make sure we get that energy in stuff that when we're designing it.
And it's all about consultation, and it's all about moving away from the idea of planning being something from the top.
Yep.
Someone comes with a great idea and drops it, on the Aylesbury in the middle of Southwark, and here's my plan, and that's not what I think creates a good place.
And that's where we
it's
go
actually
wrong
working with communities, understanding what is it that they like about that, and actually it could be that tree, and sometimes it is a tree, sometimes it is a corner, sometimes it is a particular view, and that letting that shape the master plan, letting that shape your development.
Do you think people are aware? Do you think if you ask people, they know why they like a place? Like, I think the things that you're talking about, grain, density, I don't think that if you asked in a public consultation using words like that, people would necessarily know. I think that's what architects and urban planners have to do. Like, we have to be the ones that understand this space syntax, to use the kind of wanky word, of like how you create places that do feel human scale. Like, I don't think,
but they do understand things like front doors and trees and things like that. Like
stuff about that you wouldn't like. Why don't people like certain places and do like others? I think it's hard to articulate it.
Well, they hate it. I mean, when you look at it, I'm interested in your point, but I'm responding because I do think there is a thing that people hate when they don't feel safe, and there's like kind of unlooked over space and all the things. Anyway, I'll let you.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think I agree with you. People don't necessarily understand our language, so as architects, we have to find the language to communicate, and we're actually good at it. I mean, architects are good at drawing, at finding illustrations and other ways, simple ways to explain what their plans are without the technical language. I think there's many examples of many architects that can do that quite well. And sometimes if necessary, there's other community consultation, communications organizations that can support us to reach out to people in a language that people can engage with and can trust and can use the responses we need.
I think it's a really interesting point. I think that language of tangibility is really important. And I slightly disagree about a lot of architects I don't think are good at this. Some are very good at this, about explaining that, and we often go, every architect I know is probably guilty at some point of getting into the conceptual stuff and actually how we translate that. And I see that same parallel in sustainability, so that there's a really, really important work to be done, but you get a challenge around kind of the words that are used, and it becomes a bit like a spreadsheet, and then then there's a bit of a kickback on 15-minute cities and things, which is such an obvious thing to people who, to me, seems like a obviously good thing, but there's a kind of reaction to it because there's a lack of tangibility. I wondered whether how do we get to more tangible kind of words and communication with people, with normal people who are using the buildings.
I mean, sometimes it's about engaging in ways with the simple things, activities, themes around understanding their day-to-day life. How do you go to the primary school? What do you need? How was your cycle?
It's getting back
your cycle routes around this neighborhood, and going to the tangibles of people's experiences in the place. What I think that does to a plan, by contrast with something that comes very top-down, is it shapes much more organic blocks, streets. Sometimes it almost doesn't look like it's been designed, and it is designed. It's just designed from the bottom up, and to me, that's the big difference, and that's what makes a good plan, and that's what creates a good place, and that's what I think architects need to not be afraid of, is to kind of lose that idea that it is my vision, and just not be afraid of a drawing or a plan that doesn't look perfect, that doesn't look all symmetric, doesn't look, doesn't have these axes or whatever, and just is something that comes from the simple tree that is there, and instead of a square block you actually have a more twisted block. That's okay, because that's what's going to create a big play, a good place.
This guy Steve Smith, who's a urban planner or urban designer, and he has done lots of studies on the kind of different spatial plans, and he said that if you look over the past 100 years, capitalism tends towards getting larger and larger blocks. So the grain in cities actually shifts in the reverse way to what you're saying. It will tend to be that somebody will buy, one kind of corner of a city block, and then the other corner, and then the other 4 corners, and they'll go, oh great, now that I've got control of all of it, let's get rid of all the little alleyways in between and build one big building. And that's the tendency, and you see that, like, there's lots of, actually in Peckham, there's lots of that happening, where you've got, little old alleyways being replaced by things that occupy an entire city block. And so I think, some of the stuff that you're saying, I don't think is that obvious, and it isn't stuff that is like clearly written. There's no, or if there is, it's not incentivized enough over what developers will tend to do is try and put things together, marriage value.
It's because they want high covenant. In my experience, the reason why I get bigger spaces is because they want covenants of leases, so they want big spaces, not lots of independent shops. I don't know.
I think, there's a balance there, right? If you consider the Aylesbury Estate, we're actually stepping back from a very, very big slab block to, 5 smaller perimeter blocks. They are certainly not as small and intimate as the Peckham lanes you're talking about. But we're not always going in that direction.
But it's not private either, it's council.
It's not, yeah.
So that's, I think, the difference. You haven't got market forces acting in quite the same way.
Well, you do, because you've got JVs, so you've got a balance there.
Yeah.
And I would kind of slightly challenge that. Some of those small alleyways, you wouldn't be able to deliver with current building regulations, daylight, sunlight requirements. Yeah. It's true. We've done some studies in the past on mansion blocks, which is something I'm quite fan of. And you can't quite deliver pure mansion blocks in the sense of what they used to be in the late 1800s today, because you had rooms without
as well.
Yeah, all single aspect. You had rooms without a window, you had bedrooms without windows. I mean, you can't do that. It's not to our current standards. But we can understand some of those principles as to why were those good blocks, because they had a pretty good density. They had communal entrances. They delivered something of a good critical mass of people without being perhaps 20 stories in around 6-8 stories, and some principles from there you can perfectly translate into regenerating areas like the Aylesbury Estate or other areas, other parts of, or growing, extending like we're doing here, Broadway Malyan is doing here in Leeds on Kirkstall Road. We're doing basically blocks there. To a certain extent, the scale is comparable to a mansion block scale. So you can kind of build on those principles. You can't purely copy everything, because obviously daylight, sunlight requirements wouldn't allow you. And some of it is understandable. I
think it's challenging, isn't it, with all the different... I totally agree with that. I often got told about, you should, let's look at the Kensington blocks, which I've actually looked at a lot. And I was like, well, guys, if you want that, you also can't get your new London plan dual aspect. So it is really critical. So today we're at UKREiiF. So I was kind of going to move on and think about, with all of these things, because I think it's a fascinating conversation, how can we change things? How can we shape the industry to sort of take on board some of those points where we're not quite, we know some of the key ingredients for placemaking, but we're not getting it at the sort of urban planning scale. And I'm just interested about how you think we could shape this, and who in your opinion is shaping it at the moment, and where could it be improved?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I'm glad to see so many people, young, old, all genders, a mix of ethnicities in and around the UKREiiF. I think the UKREiiF is a really good platform to have those conversations, to have everyone involved in shaping the built environment. At the end of the day, the built environment shapes what we're going to be as a society and as an economy and as people, really, because we're we're shaped by where we live, right?
Yeah.
And up to now, you can kind of say that that the built environment has been pretty much designed, built, funded by the same sort of people. I think this is a point when that has to change. So it serves it serves all people of all kinds. It serves different life experiences, and for that we need to involve everyone in the conversation, because the lived experiences of women, young people, people with different mobilities, different cultural backgrounds is different, and that needs to be taken into account. And that can have a huge impact, I think, in if you have more people feeling safe walking, more women feeling safe walking to home past 9 p.m. when it's dark. You actually unlock opportunities for women to work in jobs that extends past 6 p.m. You increase opportunities, access to cultural events, for example, and that will drive a cultural economy. So I do think genuinely this is an opportunity to have everyone of all kinds having that conversation, shaping what kinds of environments we need. How can it serve me when I go home at 8 p.m.? How can it serve me when I'm with my buggy and 2 children, trying to get into a tube station? Do I have a lift? Do I not? Does that allow me to still do drop off and go to my job, or take my children to a cultural event that I wish to
and that
do?
comes back to that tangibility and meaning, because if it's just a certain group of people designing and using the language that suits them, actually thinking at that wider piece is so important.
So you wrote an article today that was published in BD, which takes this point about who designs and builds cities, in a kind of like, you take that sort of gender, I suppose, argument, and then you apply it kind of to like a wider, as you say, emphasis on inclusivity of all sort of aspects. What practical steps, though, can architectural practices sort of apply to their own thinking, both in terms of their kind of hiring, their policies towards their own staff, but also then their design thinking, to try and change attitudes, to try and be more inclusive and bring forward cities that are better designed for a wider range of people?
So in the practice, it really is about involving everyone in the design and having a mix of people in the leadership. And I think, unfortunately, architectural practices and the construction industry in general isn't quite there yet. So I would argue for some quotes and actively encouraging leaders to bridge that gap and to not have just one person to literally tick the box, to be bold and aim for an equal representation and the leadership to what we have in society, to have a truly mixed board, truly mixed leaders. In terms of our work, is actually about consulting with people and understanding their lived experiences and having that shape the designs and the places that we do. That is from the urban design and the outside of buildings, as well as to the homes and the design of a home. So many times, men are involved in the design of a home, and actually women spend an awful lot of time at home. How often are their voices heard about what should the home have? How many homes have a proper space to store a buggy, for example, and is needed? I remember, having my buggy on blocking our entrance to the living room for years. And that's probably not accommodating the needs of all. So I do think it's about that.
No, it's super important. I think, I have that. I mean, I've got 3 small kids, so I've got that problem at the moment. I do think it's something we're missing a little bit still in the industry, and I think our colleague who's here with us today was like, it's still, although it's UKREiiF is improving, the industry as a whole looks quite male still, and I think there's a way to go.
Yeah, so Ellen is not from the property industry, who's our podcast producer, and she said, wow, there's a real type of person here, isn't it? And it's a man in a blue suit. I think that's what you were alluding to. Very specific genre of man.
Yeah, there's still some work to do. Yeah, we've got still some work to do. But I do feel positive, if I'm honest. In my article on BD, it's actually positive. It's saying this is a good platform. For a start, it is in the north of England. For a start, it's got a lot of young people. It's away from, the south of France and a very exclusive resort to to an area. If you just walk outside of the gated area, you can actually see real regeneration going on.
And the sun's really shining today as well, which helps. And it does feel.
John on a previous podcast said that it was too rainy in Leeds. No, you said it was.
I think it was just last year I came and I got really soaked, and so that was perhaps a bit unfair.
Saying nice things about the weather in Leeds.
No, but I also came here and it was buzzing when we came in, so I think it was nice to see, and I think. Kind of moving into on the positive thing, I think it's always interesting to understand a bit more about what we can do and the challenges that are facing our cities. So we've talked a lot about the work you've been doing, but I'm kind of interested in, do you have any particular radical ideas or example projects that you think we should be thinking about more as an industry?
Yes, I think we should look at cities, should look at traffic, should improve some of our roads. There's some really good examples. For example, in Sheffield, the converting grey to green landscape, a landscaped approach to streets and infrastructure within cities can really change the way people travel, can really make an enormous contribution to air quality and to the spaces, and activate edges, activate businesses, as even with more footfall. I think that's essential. Looking at brownfield sites and prioritizing the regeneration, redevelopment of those is key.
Yep.
That's within cities. If you look outside, I think then it goes back to what we were talking about before, is when we think about large-scale developments, i.e. the new towns and other sort of large greenfield developments, is about making sure those are falling in the right places where there's transport infrastructure, where a mix of uses can be supported, so we can live healthier and more sustainable lives.
Brilliant. Well, Anna, it's been a real pleasure having you, and I'm very much looking forward to the Women in Architecture breakfast on Thursday that I'm attending, which will be fascinating, and everyone should check out your article in BD as well.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Thank you so much, John. My pleasure.
It's been great to have you. Really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.